In the last video we talked about, just mentioned the land bridge theory, how people inhabited North and South America, and then we looked very quickly at the different tribes and Native Americans that settled here with that theory. And then we alluded to at the very end of the video just what happens when the Europeans came, this totally different culture. And we're going to look at, well, we all know they did come, we're sitting here. But why did they come? Why did the Europeans begin to explore? And so we can understand what brought them here. So that is the main point of this video. The exploration started, major European exploration started back in the 1400s. And this was a typical ship with which they would head out with. Some of the big ideas you're going to see in this video are you're going to walk away knowing the 5 reasons for European exploration, and then you're going to know the results of exploration. So you know the why and the what happened, or the result of it. There were many different European countries paid for explorations for many different reasons. And it's kind of complicated, but there are 5 basic reasons that we will examine. The first reason was to find a sea route for spices to get to Asia. See, they didn't have refrigeration, so their meat spoiled very quickly, but they didn't have a lot of resources, and so they would continue to eat spoiled meat and spoiled things. Well, spoiled things taste terrible, and so one of the things that the Europeans wanted that did not grow naturally in Europe, in the climates, were these spices that came from Asia. And things like cinnamon and cloves and things like that, that they would heavily put on the soiled and the spoiled meats and food to make it edible, so they could handle it. So, again, no refrigeration. So to prevent spoiling, people not only would use spices once it did spoil to cover up the flavor of the meat, but then they would take salt, and we see it all the time in stores, beef jerky, turkey jerky. They would salt the meat to pull out the moisture. The salt does that, and so it dries the meat and it doesn't spoil. They also, again, they use a lot of spices like pepper to cover the taste of soiled meat. These spices did not grow in Europe. They were only found in countries like China, Japan, and India. And these countries were what the Europeans referred to together as the Indies. So when a European at that time would say, we think we need to go to the Indies, they were referring to one of those 3 countries. They had over-the-land trade routes to India and China. But they were very dangerous, and you could not carry as much on a caravan of donkeys or horses or as you could put in the cargo hold of a ship. But originally, the trade routes to and from Asia were overland, and they would start in Italy, Genoa, Venice. They would come down, cross over. It was called the Silk Road. They would get to China, or they would come down here, go through modern-day Iraq and Iran, and come into India. Go through Afghanistan also. So it was by hand. It made the spices extremely expensive because they could not bring back much. The spices had to be brought across thousands of miles of dangerous mountains and deserts by spice traders. There were bandits waiting to rob them all the time. It was a very dangerous thing to do. So they decided we need to find new routes from Europe here to get to these spices. And the alternative was to bring the spices by ship. Sea voyage was dangerous, also due to pirates and storms. And so the difficulty made getting spices from Asia very, very expensive. Only the very wealthy could handle it. So the first reason was they needed spices. The second reason was gold, silver, and precious stones, riches. There was gold, and there was silver, and there were these things in these other countries that the Europeans wanted. And they weren't necessarily didn't want them to buy them, they wanted to just conquer them. So there was a real motivation for wealth and riches, especially by the monarchies, the kings and queens in Europe. And this was because the European rulers, they fought many wars. Wars are expensive, so they needed money, they needed income to supply their armies with food and uniforms and weapons. So they needed a large amount of gold to pay for these. They believed that Asia, or the Indies, that meant India and Asia and China, and Japan, were loaded with gold and silver and precious stones. So they decided to go there, find it, take it, and bring it back to support their wars, to support their economy. Reason 3, as they traveled across, they realized that other cultures knew things or had information that they never had. Technology. They came across, when they got to the Arabic countries, the concept of zero. Lots of things, medicines from the Arabic countries, lots of things that Europe at this time was just coming out of the Dark Ages, did not know of. So knowledge was another main one. Most people had never seen the outside of Europe. Many people thought the world was still flat. Or at that time, they still thought the world was flat, I should say. Many educated Europeans knew it wasn't, but the majority of the populace thought it was. They had no idea how large the world was. Though they knew it may be round, but they didn't know if it was just the continent of Europe and Asia. So they had no concept of the vastness of the world. Another reason that kind of goes along with the idea of gold and riches is larger empires. These leaders in Europe, typically the kings and the queens, wanted to build their empires. They wanted to create more and more for them to rule. So some Europeans wanted to claim as much land as they could. They wanted to take all the resources from the discovered land. They thought, we need it, you have it, I want it, we'll take it. And they decided, well, in order to have this happen, we're going to need laborers and workers, so we'll just enslave the people that live there. So in many cases, they had technology, guns, weapons that were beyond the technology level that some of the native people had, so they did go in to conquer and to rule. And the very last reason that Europeans began to explore was to expand Christianity. And when you want to share your faith, what you believe, that is called evangelism. To evangelize is to tell somebody about what you believe. Most of Europe at that time was Christian. And the European rulers were very religious. The Pope, the Christian faith, the Catholic faith, and the Protestant faith had a lot of influence over these rulers. And so they thought it was their job to go throughout the world and spread what they called the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ dying for your sins. And so that's the basic tenet of the Christian faith. So they felt that we want everybody to know this good news, so it is our job to go out and spread it. So with the conquerors, they sent religious people to spread it. So what were some of the results of exploration? It always wasn't good. It led to increased power and wealth for Europe. Christianity and the culture of Western Europe spread, and there were some real positives with those. But the ethnocentric attitudes of the Europeans, ethno means ethnicity, centric means the center. So you think that your race, your ethnic group is the center, is the best, it's the one that you determine really kind of sets the standard for how all other people should live. And the Europeans really felt like they were better in many ways. And that led to some real mistreatment of the native people. And what I mean by mistreatment was slavery began, where they began to take slaves from Africa and other parts of Asia and send them to America once America was discovered. Here are some questions to help you review. Make sure you bring these notes and the answers to these to class tomorrow.